Fantastic. Hi, everybody, and thank you ever so much for coming along to join us. We were worried we might not get anyone turning up with the weather being as nice as it is, so thank you for giving up a sunny evening to come and join us. First thing to say is that there are no fire drills planned this evening, but housekeeping for you all. So if there is a fire alarm, which hopefully there won't be, please just exit out the way that you have come in. And also a quick hello to everyone that's joining us online. For everybody in the room, we're live streaming this event as well. So if you see me looking at that camera at any point, that is why. And I realise this mic isn't projecting any sound, it is for our online people. So don't worry, it's not just broken or a prop. So for tonight's discussion then, we are going to be chatting about the media and the significant role that it's playing in the world and in our political views and how our opinions are formed. During this evening's event, we're going to discuss data and AI's role in politics and the media. And we've got some great speakers lined up to chat to you. With the advent of deepfakes and synthetic content, it's more important than ever that we discuss, that we know about authenticity of news. So what we're going to go through tonight is we've got 3 presentations from our panel down here. Please save all your questions for the end, and online people in particular, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and we'll make sure we get to those in the Q&A session as well. So if you've got a burning question once someone's talked, please just hang on to it and we will get to them. Probably a good time to say that this event is part of our Data Lab community. So if you aren't already a member of the community, our QR code is here. We'd encourage you to join. We host these events on a regular basis, and we actually host online ones as well. Wide range of topics, everything from sort of financial sector to, we've got a Women in Data and AI Meetup as well. So we a whole load of things. We also post jobs, and there's sort of discussion forums about interesting topics. So please feel free to sign up. That would be great. And then we've also got some LinkedIn channels. So if you do feel like posting any pictures or sharing any comments on tonight's events, please tag us. We'd really appreciate that. And all of the details are there. Is that good? Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker tonight, and it is McKinley Hayden, sorry. Already asked and got it wrong first time. I'll let McKinley introduce herself, but she works for the Financial Times. She is the Director for Data Value and Strategy team, whose responsibilities include knowledge management and AI, data fluency, data strategy, and a range of valuation of analytical work. So obviously going to be talking specifically about AI and politics and media. So can I invite McKinley up? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to start this off by saying any of the opinions expressed in this presentation are my own and not those of the FT. And I've said it. So yes. Oh, wow, that's a big picture of me. That's horrible. I am McKinley Hayden. I often mispronounce my own name, so it's cool. Director of Data Value and Strategy, and basically that's just like fancy words for saying that what we try to do is increase the value of the FT's data capabilities to the organization. We have lots of pretty cool ways to do that. But I'm not going to tell you about that so far. I'm going to tell you about the FT's generative AI journey as it stands, but it's always evolving. So first things first, a lot of how we think about things at the FT is around risks, because we're a really risk-averse culture. And so you can imagine there was a lot of like, when generative AI exploded onto the scene. The big concerns were that there was going to be an inappropriate use of generative AI. I don't know how many of you pay for a subscription to the FT or don't, as a result of us being really expensive, but we are really expensive, and part of why we can get people to pay us that money is because of our high integrity and our credibility, and that's the system. If somebody is found to be misusing generative AI, that kind of puts that all down like a house of cards. So that's bad. Bad loss of reputation, revenue, et cetera, et cetera. However, there's also an opportunity. We could do more with less because we don't have, Morgan Stanley's budgets or anything like that. We could serve customers better. So there are some good things that could happen as a result. And the inevitable happened. I came back from holiday in January just to find out that we'd bought licenses with Gemini and ChatGPT, and the CEO asked for an AI fluent FT, which sort of landed in my lap, which was super fun. An AI fluent FT, the first question we asked is, well, what does that mean? And we're still figuring that out. But broadly, the way that we talk about it internally is that AI fluency is the confident and responsible use of AI to achieve the FT's objectives. And generally, the way that we're thinking about this, because originally the goal was 100% fluency across the organization. We were like, by the end of the year, and we were like, we've kind of molded that a bit so that it's okay if only a small number are achieving fluency, as long as kind of literacy is pervasive. So just making sure people are doing no harm. I'm not going to read this, but basically the first thing that we did after buying these licenses and deciding that we were going to embrace the technology was creating an AI policy. And I'm really proud of this, actually. We really spent a lot of time thinking about what our principles were as an organization and creating an AI policy that reflected that. There's also a really wonderful letter from our editor, Rula, about our editorial stance on this technology. I have a link to it in the slides. I do recommend, if you can access it, reading it. Because it's just, I think it's a really wonderful articulation of how a media brand is thinking about this. So then, in order to actually achieve this AI fluency objective, we created a collaborative group that we called the AI Fluency Initiative. And this was all really trying to think about how we achieve this through different types of learning interventions, rather than just being technology driven and just and kind of going that way. It was really about how can we improve confidence and, again, responsible use of these tools. And so it was a collaboration across data and analytics, staff experience who managed the tools, comms, totally key, and then learning and development, and then our delivery teams. I'm also not going to read through this, but what did we do? We did quite a lot. So initially, we were looking at 4 tools, primarily ChatGPT and Gemini, but we also did GitHub Copilot and MoveWorks. But we invested a lot of time in training and making sure there were workshops in lots of different formats, run by sort of different people to kind of engage different groups. And as you can see, we had an ethics in AI workshop alongside kind of that initial introduction. So kind of from the very beginning, ethics and responsible use were part of the conversation. We also, another thing that I think I took out of this deck, did I? Yes, I did. Ooh, wrong way. One thing just to mention, because I wasn't sure if I'd have enough time, we actually did a lot of internal surveying to figure out how people felt about this technology. And I think that's kind of important because it's quite an emotive topic, especially in media. And so we thought there was just absolutely no way that we were going to be able to get buy-in and create this AI fluent workforce if we didn't even just understand in the first instance how were people feeling about this technology. So we did that alongside kind of the assessment of skills. And the way we did that is we created our own AI fluency capability framework. So this is kind of how we're thinking about it. So you've got these 5 different levels. So AI beginning, AI literate, AI fluent, AI progressing, and AI advanced. And then we've got these categories. So tools, productivity and innovation, critical thinking, pretty important, governance and ethics. And the idea is that what we should be able to do is be able to kind of benchmark each individual and our organization as a whole as to where we kind of sit across this framework. And we thought it was important to break it out along these different dimensions so that we could understand more sort of specifically where the areas of intervention were needed. And again, I think having a real focus on things outside of just the tools. I think this is sometimes the frustration. It's like, yeah, okay, you can make a prompt, that's great, good for you, or you can make a custom GPT, but like, is it actually solving a business problem, or is it the right application of it? Is it ethical? These are the things that we want to make sure people are thinking of. So how we're kind of proceeding with this is we've initially we were trying to do something a little bit holistic, but we've realized that that's not going to work. So we've gone down a real tailored approach where we're actually working kind of department by department, and in some cases sort of avoiding the conversation of AI until the very last minute, and really asking these more open-ended questions around the problems that they are trying to solve, and trying to figure out if there are examples, if there are valuable problems that maybe do have like an AI solution. But it's really starting with the problems. Otherwise, it's with the famous quote of, well, if you have a hammer, everything's a nail, all this kind of stuff. There's no point in wasting time and resources by just misapplying this technology. And also, given its enormous environmental cost, I don't think we should be just splashing it about. So we're trying to be very, very focused in terms of where we're applying it. So I wish I had more like jazzy slides for this. I'm sorry, maybe next time. But just a couple of things that we've been experimenting with that I wanted to kind of shout out. So we have a whole program focused with editorial called Accelerate AI, which is doing that experimentation around some of the problems that generative AI can solve. And it's been an interesting project that maybe I'll share more about offline. There's been a lot of excitement about this technology, but also a lot of nervousness. One thing that's gotten a lot of traction is called story finding, which is about using generative AI to kind of reveal some potential stories. So this is particularly within our data journalism team. They have to spend so much time sifting through stuff and compiling data to make these stories. It's very, very labor intensive. So the idea here was just to make some of this stuff a bit more automated and actually give the journalists back more of time to do the actual writing and the actual reporting. So far, that seems to be going well. The second one is around presentation of content. So this is not writing anything. That's a huge red line in the sand for us. Like, we are not going to publish anything that has been written by a bot or by a non-human. But we are trying to look at ways to sort of just summarize existing content or just structure bullets. Again, just to free up people's time and make sure that we're experimenting with different ways of formatting content. Another one that's been hugely successful is around comments moderation. We have a team that does this, and you may be shocked to hear this, but some people do think that the FT's comment section is a great place to spew vitriol. It's really shocking. I mean, what an expensive way to be hateful. Some free places where you can be a bigot, but whatever. So even with getting people to, even getting the team to work flat out 24/7 and not take any loo breaks or eat anything, we still wouldn't be able to moderate all of the comments. And so actually being able to use some of this tooling to come in and help flag has been enormously helpful, and the success rate has been very, very high. So that's quite good. The other thing is Ask the FT, which is basically an improvement on our search function, which is diabolical. That's my opinion, not the FT's. It is the FT's. Anyway, this is an ability to, you can come in, and right now we're just doing it with our B2B audience, but you can come in and actually ask, instead of just trying to find specific articles, you could ask for kind of a summary of a particular topic and so on. So that's one thing, and we're going to be testing that out. The other thing, again, it's an automated, it's kind of just an efficiency thing around B2B content lead generation. So right now they have a process where they go, where a B2B person will find an article where somebody is mentioned or an organization is mentioned, and then they have this whole system of reaching out to that organization and saying, hey, you've been mentioned, and shouldn't you buy an amazing license with the FT? And it's a very, very time-intensive process, but it does result in pretty great outcomes and quite a lot of signups. But they have managed to use, I can't remember which tool, but a generative AI tool that allows them to actually build these leads I think they were doing 2 a week, and now they can do 60. I mean, it's phenomenally faster. We're still working out to see what the conversion rate is over time and see, because obviously if they don't convert, then it's still not useful. But even just knowing that it can speed up that process has been a really helpful learning. And then the very last one is around IT help desk automations. I want to include this one because actually this one failed. So we used MoveWorks, and the idea was to try to automate the phenomenal number of requests that IT get. We learned a lot, but it just sort of didn't work for us. And it's still a problem that we need to figure out how to solve. But I think the business has been, we historically don't like to admit when anything hasn't worked. And so actually having this really shown as a success and using kind of the right kind of thinking in our approach with AI has been a real success. So I think in summation, the way that the FT is thinking about generative AI is that this is a leveling technology. It will disrupt our industry and the world. Not engaging isn't an option. Like we have got to engage with this, and we've got to be a voice in this and figure out the right way to use it in our organization. So taking a responsible and a thoughtful approach is absolutely key, as is giving our employees the skills and confidence to experiment and work out valuable applications. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Well, that was so interesting. If you've got any questions for McKinley, just hang on to them, please. I love the idea of using your chatbots for dealing with the horrible comments. That's a great way to deal with them. So we're going to pivot a little now, because obviously McKinley's talk was very much about Financial Times, so about media. Our next speaker, Alan, has a media background as well, but also is coming from very much a political background. So he's going to talk to us a bit about politics. Alan Rodden is the co-CEO and co-founder of Quantum Communications. He has worked in Scottish politics and media for 2 decades. Showing your age there, Alan. He's worked as a senior advisor to leading politicians and worked for sort of Scottish Labour, and has also worked for the Daily Mail newspaper. So we're getting a slightly different perspective from Alan. Thank you.
Cheers. Yeah, so I've got this presentation using data to win an election, and this isn't a foolproof guide, because I want to make it clear from the outset that I have been involved in many campaigns which have lost. So this is absolutely not the blueprint for success. But yeah, thanks, Ali. And so from my background, a brief summary. So I started off as a journalist here in Edinburgh on the local paper. I then moved to Daily Mail. I was the political editor in Scotland for 8 years, from 2008 until 2016. So for those of you who know Scottish political history, that was a really quiet time in Scottish politics. There wasn't much going on at all. I then went up for the Daily Mail to the Labour Party, which I appreciate is a pretty unusual career move. I think I'm probably quite unique in that. And I was director of comms for Scottish Labour when Kezia Dugdale was the leader of the party. When she then resigned, I then went to work for Anna Sawa, ran his first campaign, which is an example of one we lost, although he did eventually win second time round. So I'm involved in quite a few elections, including the most recent 2024 general election, where I was seconded across to help the Scottish Labour campaign. So I'll come on to a few lessons from that particular campaign towards the end of my presentation. But just to start off with, in terms of winning an election, there are 3 key elements to this, which are fairly obvious. The first one is you need to build support. So that requires your messaging, your personalities. That is the consistent throughout all elections anywhere in the world. The 2 elements I wanted to focus on today in relation to data are the persuading undecided voters, which is absolutely vital to winning a contest, and maximising turnout. And this phrase, GOTV, you may not have heard, that stands for get out the vote. It's a political phrase that all parties use, and you'll hear a lot, as an election comes closer and closer, you'll hear lots of panic politicians saying GOTV and shouting at the top of their voice to get out there onto their doorsteps. So at the heart of this, today we have data-driven campaigning, and here's a definition from Professor Kate Dommett from Sheffield University. A mode of campaigning that seeks to use data to develop and deliver campaign interventions with the goal of producing behavioural or attitudinal change in democratic citizens. And for those of you who want to learn a lot more about how data is used, particularly in different countries, Kate has written a book which looks at 5 different nations, including America, which obviously has a fascinating story to tell. So it's well worth looking that up and reading. The kind of data that political parties use starts obviously with the electoral register, with around 40 million people in the UK who are registered voters, and that includes their address, of course. Parties also do a lot of doorstep canvassing, spending a lot of time on doors speaking directly to voters to find out how they voted in the past, how they're planning to vote, and what issues that affect they're interested in. Telephone canvassing, a huge thing as well. Back when it was previous landlines, but now today you can do it through mobile phones as well with software. Opinion polling, it's been around for many decades now and gives a helpful snapshot of what people and the country are thinking, and that's obviously broken down by demographics. Focus groups, which I'll come on to in a little bit more detail as well. And then probably the most contentious element is the profiling software for the likes of Experian, which obviously has caused some issues in some of our recent campaigns, and there's probably a whole other session we can do around the Brexit campaign, which we will park for this evening. But in terms of using data in elections, it's nothing new. It's something old. In fact, I think you can go back to Roman times to find out about people canvassing. The 1945 general election in the UK, when Labour won, defeating Winston Churchill's Conservative Party, there's actually quite a good example there. So this gentleman here on the right is Ian Mikado. He became the MP for Reading in that particular election, gaining it from the Conservatives. And he and his team actually used a system called the Reading system, named after the constituency he was standing in, where when they were speaking to voters on the doorstep, they would use 4 sheets of paper with carbon copies, make a note of how they planned to vote. When it came to polling day, the teams would rip off those sheets and would go around and speak to those voters. And once they knew if they had voted, they could then feed this back to HQ, and they could be marked off, and so that they knew they didn't have to worry about those voters and they could concentrate on the ones who hadn't yet said they'd been out to vote. So it was an early form of using data, and that system, in a very modern fashion, still exists today. If we fast forward 40 years or so to the 1980s, and here we have Peter Mandelson on the right-hand side there, I'm sure you're all familiar with. So around about 1985, Peter started working for the Labour Party, and I actually read his autobiography, or reread it last night, just before doing this, called The Third Man. And this is where he talked about how they borrowed a technique from America for the first time in the UK. And I'll just read a short quote from it. He said, with a cheque for £600, I commissioned Philip Gould to conduct a stocktake of Labour's communications and campaigning, and it would prove the best investments I ever made. He gave us and British politics its first ever taste of American-style political consultancy. He didn't use traditional opinion polls, which we had used for years. He assembled what was called focus groups to explain why people felt as they did about an issue, how this fitted into what they valued in their lives, and what it might take to change their minds. So that was the first kind of time that was being used. Data was being used in that way to try and persuade those undecided voters. And over time, over the course of a decade, Labour used that data to work out why people were voting for Margaret Thatcher's Conservative Party and how they'll go on. And ultimately, obviously led to the success of New Labour under Tony Blair in 1997. If I jump forward another 30 years or so, and it felt I couldn't really be amiss not to mention the independence referendum, given we are 10 years on from that contest as of yesterday. Without making any observation at all on the merits or otherwise, something blue. So what happened in that campaign for the Better Together campaign, which obviously was successful, was it used a company called Blue State Digital, which was President Obama's digital campaigning team in his successful elections in America. So they brought them across to Scotland, and they explained to Better Together how the country was split into 30, 30, and 40, with 30% of people committed to independence and wouldn't be swayed, 40% committed to staying part of the United Kingdom and wouldn't be swayed, and there was 30% in the middle who were undecided. And that's where Better Together had to target all its resources. So they worked with data to work out what was motivating these people, and essentially it was risk and uncertainty was what they were most concerned about. So the Better Together campaign entirely focused on that risk and uncertainty of independence, and was successful in doing so, while the Yes campaign ran a much more positive, energetic campaign, enthusiastic campaign. It didn't reach the undecideds in the way the Better Together campaign did, which is ultimately why we had the result that we did 10 years ago. And if I bring it right up to date, the elements of a modern election campaign. So when you're running a campaign, all political parties have these elements here on the left-hand side. We have something what's called a grid, and that is where you map out what's going to happen during the course of the campaign over every day, what your message of the day is, what the message of the week is, where the key politicians are, what debates are happening, etc. So there's someone in charge of that. There's always someone in charge of the media. So this was my role when I worked for directly in politics. That is obviously trying to get the most positive coverage you can in the newspapers and on TV. You have your digital team, increasingly important. So these people who spend the money on advertising, on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, etc. And again, this is all linked in together, amplifying those messages which we agreed in the grid. We have what's called a print team, which isn't anything to do with print newspapers. That's actually the leaflets that are distributed through people's doors. Well, I'm sure you've all had lots of them landing on your doormats a few months back. And then probably most relevant in terms of data is what we call the field teams. They're the people who are out on the doorsteps gathering the data from people saying how they're going to vote. And this is the kind of when people, what's called running the board, which is what someone's in charge of running the board on a canvassing campaign. This is the kind of information that they record. So this is the real one from, I think it's just Sterling somewhere. And the kind of questions that you're asking them. What is their voting intention? How have they previously voted? What's their second preference? So all this data is recorded and then fed back into the campaign to bring it all together. So bringing it onto the most recent campaign. So the Labour Party, or the Scottish Labour Party, knocked on around about 1 million doors in the run-up to the 2024 campaign to gather as much data as it could. And it mapped that then across national polling to demographics to work out who the voters were that it needed to target to win in Scotland. And you can probably guess the kind of people they were. They were people who previously voted for the Scottish National Party. They tended to be middle-aged, often lived in modern housing estates, but had financial concerns. So they were the key target demographic, which the data showed as where it needed to be targeted. And something similar was happening down south as well. There was a phrase called hero voters you may have heard of used in England, who were Labour's key target voters. And these were, again, very similar demographic, but they were tended to be more right-leaning and probably voted for Brexit and tended to live in what's called the red wall seats, so traditional working-class areas of England. They switched to Conservatives under Boris Johnson, and Labour's aim was to win those voters back. So all its messaging was targeted at those individuals, remembering back to the importance of persuading the undecideds and maximising turnout. In terms of identifying what messages you want to get across, again, using data, using the focus groups. The party and all parties can work out what resonates with people. So a couple of examples here for you that really resonated. For Scottish Labour, the message that kept coming back was people wanted rid of the Conservatives. So, and we're fed up with 14 years of what they saw as Conservative chaos. So that became the main message for Labour during the campaign. But also the NHS came up time and time again. Now, this was a reserved election. The NHS will not actually part in Scotland of the general election, but that didn't matter. Scottish Labour ran a campaign on cutting NHS waiting lists. The SNP also majored on the NHS. Well, it had been seeing similar data that the NHS was what was key to voters and how they would decide. One example I haven't put up there, which you didn't hear a great deal about, certainly in Scotland anyway, maybe heard a bit more in England, was the issue of private schools and removing the VAT tax break on private schools, actually because we found surprisingly from the data that that wasn't particularly popular in lots of parts of Scotland and areas you wouldn't necessarily think you'd be surprised by. You think maybe Edinburgh, fine, but we'll go and people were knocking doors in Coatbridge, places like that, and people were really against that policy. So Scottish Labour kept that one fairly quiet based on the data. Where to target voters. So again, it uses the data gathered to find out where people are. As you imagine, younger people tend to be on Instagram, older people tend to be on Facebook. YouTube videos became a major platform, and the video completion rate was a key sort of KPI target that was set during the campaign. But also, again, going back to those voters, this is actually an English example on the left. This is the Daily Mail. So hardly a paper that's traditionally supportive of Labour, is very pro-Brexit. Labour splashed its adverts, all over the Daily Mail, which I'm sure some journalists at the Daily Mail weren't particularly happy about. And billboards as well. That's a Scottish one as well. So again, knowing where to put your billboards based on where the most likely groups of potential voters would be. When to target, again, the data was fairly easy on this one. You would target people, increase your spending on digital advertising, particularly around the time of the postal votes when they were dropping. Around about a quarter of people tend to vote by post, so you would make sure you were targeting around that point when they were landing on people's doormats and in the areas, again, where you knew your potential switchers lived. And then on polling day itself, a lot of people actually make up their mind on polling day. If you if you only read the newspapers or watch the BBC, you might sort of think the election was a done deal, and it largely was. But if you only get your politics from someone like TikTok, you might think it's still a real contest going on. So about £1 million across the UK was spent on polling day alone, just on digital advertising. And then finally, the why do all this. Ultimately, Scottish Labour wanted to emerge as the largest party in Scotland. It did so. Its data showed that it was competitive in 36 seats across Scotland. It actually won 37. It got a little bonus one as well. But it won all the 36 seats that it targeted all its efforts at based on the data. So I'll leave it at that, and that kind of ends at a point where we now have quite a competitive field in Scottish politics, which I'm sure we can maybe discuss later on.
Thank you. So interesting. I've got questions in my head that I'm worried are going to fall out, but I'm going to try and hang on to them for the end. And a reminder for online people, if you do want to ask any questions, just store them up at the end. We've got Steph next. So Steph is one of my colleagues, and she is the head of the Scottish AI Alliance. If you don't already know about the AI Alliance, so what Steph does is building collaborations across organisations to help people with their data and AI journey. Steph has been pivotal in working with the Scottish Government on creating Scotland's AI strategy and is now leading the delivery on that project.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks. Sorry, I'm the person between you and questions falling out of your head. So
I'll try to remember.
Thank you so much, you both. Actually, I was starting to think that as you guys finished your presentations, that maybe I should have come first, because I'm not going to be drilling down to detail. I'm going to talk about more general themes around politics and media. So, hello, I'm Steph. Nice to meet you all. Hi to people online. So, Scottish AI Alliance, just to kind of quickly tell you what we are. We're essentially the delivery body for Scotland's national AI strategy and the vision, which is to become a leader in trustworthy, ethical, and inclusive AI. And these are the three values that is the lens through which I'm talking about the stuff tonight. So we do this by empowering Scotland's people, supporting Scotland's businesses and organisations, and influencing policy affecting Scotland. But I just want to make clear, I do not speak for the government. And I quite often get asked questions about that, and I do not speak for the Scottish Government, although we are government adjacent. We are uniquely a hybrid team. So before I start talking about politics media, I kind of want to just set the scene around trustworthy, ethical, and inclusive, and what we mean by that, because they are words that get used a lot, and we want to be quite explicit as to what we mean by that. We do have longer explanations on our website, but just on a high level, when we say trustworthy, we mean that we need to know, be able to trust how, when, and why AI is being used. And when we talk about ethical, is that we want AI that respects and supports the values of a progressive, fair, and equal Scotland. And when we talk about inclusive, we want AI that includes everyone from across the diverse cultures and communities that make up the population of Scotland. So let's talk a bit about AI in general. I'm going to start with saying AI has a lot of cultural baggage. I'm talking about the cultural baggage because media can be termed as, you can have the very broadest definition of media, which includes, cinema, books, all sorts of form of communications, channels of communications. And AI has a lot of cultural baggage that no other emerging no other technology really has. Mentions of intelligent robots and machines go right back to, the end of the 1800s, end of the 1800s in literature. And, you don't get this cultural baggage with other things like blockchain. You have centuries of literature, cinema, art, etc., all giving us a preconceived idea of what intelligent machines would be like. And I was tempted to use pictures of Terminator and stuff, which I won't, because it does perpetuate that cultural baggage. And that is what a lot of people think about when they think about AI. So, and so there's all these preconceived notions of what AI is, and a lot of what we try to do is try and dispel some of these myths and try and get people to understand, what AI actually is. And then this leads very much to my next point, which is about hype and noise. There is so much hype, so much noise about AI, especially in the last 18 months or so, since essentially ChatGPT and other generative AI tools made a technology that was previously probably quite invisible to people, made it very visible. And there is so much out there, and the media has such a crucial part to play in this hype and noise. I mean, for starters, there's the exaggerated claims, with the big binary kind of narratives out there, because ultimately it's clickbait, right? It's sensationalism. It's something people read more if it's about AI's magic or AI's going to kill us all. And this is pretty much what the dominant narratives that get out there is, because as the media space has become busier and busier with more and more different news outlets, everyone is competing for those clicks, competing for that audience. So what's going to get people reading? No one's going to read with, oh, there's been a breakthrough in an algorithm today that incrementally increases one process. It's more of a, oh yeah, someone's discovered an AI that is going to cure cancer, or oh no, someone's created a robot, it's going to kill us all. And those are the narratives that are out there because everyone's competing for those clicks. And so the exaggerated claims, it feels like polarized views and polarized narratives and conversations about AI. And it actually doesn't align with what AI actually is capable of. And actually, a lot of it also hides the fantastic stuff that AI can do. And then, political weaponization. AI is very good at that because it can use AI narratives to push their agendas. We can, these days, your news feeds, and social media, obviously, the biggest media player in a lot of this is, AI can completely personalize your feed, and therefore, it will expand your echo chamber, or it will, it will hang on to one thing that maybe you clicked on once and it's like, oh great, we'll show them everything about that. And it's like, ooh, you did flag at me, yes. And especially younger generations, especially today, I had a younger member of my team who I was absolutely shocked when I realized they get the newsfeed through TikTok. And I was like, no way, because, and so there's a responsibility for these kind of media to ensure that there's a level of trust and integrity in what they're talking about. I'll talk a bit more about that later. Actually, no, let's just go into trust and integrity. Traditional news outlets have a responsibility, and the FT, I think it's really encouraging to hear, those ethical principles the FT set out. And it is one of these things that, like, once again, back to the whole, there's so much competition that some people just don't care if they're reporting the truth. They'll just get AI, generative AI, to create a new story that will be, clicked on, because it's like really exciting. Everyone sees that at the end of articles. You'll see all these articles at the bottom, and you're like, ooh, that sounds really exciting. And you're like, no, actually, I've learned my lesson. It's all just absolute rubbish. But it got you your click. It got that piece of data about you that, oh, maybe that person, is interested in things about Brad Pitt. Who isn't? And it's like, oh, so we can create all sorts of bizarre narratives, maybe for political gain, for commercial gain, etc., related to Brad Pitt. Either actually there isn't an ounce of truth about it at all, and there is the erosion of trust. You've heard some people say about how we're in a post-truth world. You can't trust anything anymore, and that's a problem. If you don't trust anything that you see, then who do you trust? Who do you get your trusted source of news, of information from? It's it's like deepfakes. Everyone talks about deepfakes when you talk about politics and media and propaganda. All these things existed, obviously, before AI, before generative AI. But now generative AI and other forms of extreme data analysis and personalization can exacerbate these so much. And then, ooh, sorry, I saw that. And then ultimately, I had a point here about media as gatekeepers. Traditional media often serve as gatekeepers of information. And if they lean into, if they take approaches that aren't like FTs, where you set out your ethical principles before, if you are the gatekeepers, then you become the gatekeepers of truth. And if it's not actually truth that you're presenting to your audience, that's a major problem. And you can't shy away from that responsibility. And these days, AI-driven algorithms shifted that role to tech platforms. X is a total and utter cesspit right now, right? And that's what happens. It used to be a really good source of news, a really quick, accessible source of news, and now it's so warped, and it just terrifies me that people that are using that as their source of news, because the worldviews represented on there are not at all what you and I, represent. So as that, I'm going to finish with. Oh, by the way, all these beautiful images I'm using are from a fantastic project called Better Images of AI. If you've never heard of them, please look up, because the very reason they exist is to get away from that cultural baggage, is to, excuse me, represent AI as it is and not as, the media, and culture represents it to be. So it's not, no glowing brains, no shiny robots, or no shiny robots holding human hands. We've all seen those, or, lines of code, and blue is everywhere for tech. Better Images of AI commission and work with artists to create images that represent AI as it is now, not as it might be in the future. So I love the images. These are some of the new ones they have. Technology is not neutral. I think that's the biggest thing. If you take nothing away from what I've just said, it's just remember, technology is not neutral. Technology is ultimately created by humans. We are not neutral. We are so biased. No matter how you think you're not biased, you are biased. And data reflects that bias. And AI and other data technologies can exacerbate that bias. And ultimately, this has lots of potential implications. AI technologies are being used differently across political regimes. Democracies will struggle with AI-related issues around privacy and fairness. Authoritarian regimes can use it in a complete opposite way, around surveillance, manipulation, control. And so there's lots of, technology's alignment with people's values is a big problem. And alignment with political structures, because in the wrong hands, it can be an absolute weapon, but in the right hands, it can be a really useful tool to motivate people to vote. Ultimately, power dynamics. AI is all about power dynamics. Who holds the power and who does not? Who's represented and who's not? Whose voice is heard and whose voice is not heard and not represented. So, technology is not neutral. And and I will close with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to...
I'm going to have to climb on this chair now.
Yes, invite the panel to climb back on. Don't trip, because that would be it. Yeah, sorry. We must get better seats for our panels.
Don't look at me.
Thank you so very much for 3 very different and very interesting talks. So thank you so much. I've actually written some questions myself, if that's okay, that I'd like to run over, and then I'm going to throw it open to the audience and our online audience if anyone has any questions. So I'm going to start with McKinley, if that is okay. Could you talk to us a little bit about whether you think AI is improving the world of media?
Yeah. So I don't know. What I think actually is, and I think this very much speaks to what you've just said. I think the biggest problem that media has, and when I'm talking about media, I'm sort of talking about news publishers, because that's sort of what I'm quasi-representing right now. I think their biggest problem is actually their craft. AI, as Steph was saying, is going to just exacerbate what is already there. I am so distressed at the poor quality journalism that goes out in this world, and it's not a right and left thing. I think you've got lots of like lefty publications that have decided to like engage in this political war as opposed to actually giving high quality information to the world. And I think as long as that is true, then AI will only just exacerbate what is there. And so what I would really love is for media organizations and tech platforms to stop fussing about robots and terminators and actually ask the more substantive question, which is how can we be a social good and write things that benefit humanity?
Is it likely though? I mean, it sounds like a big ask.
Yeah, I'm not hopeful. But I think it's really interesting about, consumers. Like, and again, maybe this is optimistic, but like, aren't people embarrassed when they go to cocktail parties and they've clicked on the article about Brad Pitt and they're like, oh, did you know that Brad Pitt is like actually descendant from a Martian? You know what I mean? Like, oh, did you know that? Like, I mean, aren't people embarrassed when they spout this drivel? Like, I'm hoping that we start getting into a situation where people are going to be socially punished for saying this total crap.
Hoping I start getting invited to cocktail parties. Thank you, McKinley. That's smashing. My next question is for you, Steph. How is the Scottish AI Alliance working with the media to shape how they use or don't use AI?
We don't work with the media, so for starters, but we hope to. There we go, we got you there. We haven't. But I just wanted to touch on what McKinley was saying there. Part of how we can maybe make a change is about shifting the power balance. Right now, the dominant voices that are driving the narrative are few, and because they're counting on the fact that no one else really knows. It's so clever, AI, it's so amazing. You won't understand. Just let us tell you what it's for. What's good for you. If we, educate, inform, empower people with knowledge to be able to question, what's being done. I know it all sounds a bit idealistic, power to the people and all that, but, informed populations can make a difference, and I think that's really important, because if a media outlet loses all its viewers because they realize actually what you print, what you put online is just complete and utter bull, kind of thing, then they have no audience, so they have no reason to, exist. So, if you want to do that, you attack the bottom line, which is ultimately about profit. So if you boycott particular, products and stuff, then you can change that power dynamic. I think sometimes people feel like, what can I do? OpenAI is, a multi-billion, trillion-dollar thing. They're going to build nuclear power stations and all that kind of stuff. What can I do? And you're like, well, you can help by speaking to your friends, your immediate circles, your immediate communities about what you understand about AI, and making sure that it's a balanced view. Part of it is about that balanced view. There are amazing opportunities with AI, but there are lots of risks and actual harms, specifically to people that are not involved in the conversation at all. So yeah.
Thank you, Steph. I'm going to ask Alan a question next, please. And actually, this is the question I had in my head, so it's good that I had it written down. How do political parties make decisions about what data to use? Is it purely based on sort of the data matching a policy, an opinion, or do they pool data that people will find is interesting. I think what you touched on in your slides, and it was quite interesting to me, is that it seems to be used heavily, and I guess that's a risk.
It is a risk, but I think it's so well honed now that because you're targeting certain voters who are going to decide the results, it is incredibly data-driven on what the data is telling you, rather than what the political party thinks you should be interested in. It's very much this is what the data says, whether it's focus groups, polls, or doorsteps, and that becomes the focus. And actually, to give you one example from yesterday, I thought was quite interesting. So. There was a lot of obviously attention yesterday on the independence referendum anniversary, but I noticed Scottish Labour actually put out a policy on housing yesterday, which is quite an unusual day to choose to do it when there's so much other media coverage. But the reason they did that was in all the recent opinion polls and focus groups, housing has shot to the top, or near the top, of people's priorities for the government. There was a poll out last week on what people thought the Scottish Government's top 3 priorities should be. Housing came 4th in that. It used to be languishing at sort of 10th, 11th, 12th. Obviously NHS still is by far away the top thing, but that kind of was one example of using that data and going, well, actually, we know people want to be talking about housing and probably actually don't want to be talking about the Constitution. So that, so it's very driven by what the numbers are telling you.
I've got another question for each of the panelists, but I'm conscious of time and I don't want to give people miss an opportunity to ask questions. So if there's time, I'll come back to questions I had lined up for you. But would anybody in the audience like to ask a question? And I'll run along with my mic if you do. Okay, here. I've just got one at the back first. Bear with me. Obviously, this doesn't have sound. It's just for our online audience. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question for McKinley about specifically the story finding application of AI models. So I'm wondering how you deal with the hallucination problems in large language models, because in my experience, having used AI for data retrieval or for generating summaries, is that you spend quite a lot of time checking the work of the AI, which is potentially more than you gain by using it in the first place. And so I'm wondering if you and your colleagues have found effective ways of dealing with this problem.
Seen that in a few of our applications. I don't work super closely with that team, so I don't know how they do that. But if you want, I'm really happy for us to have a conversation and I can find out more details. But I know that has been a struggle in some of our other AI initiatives. But yeah, we can chat.
So I'd love to know. I left journalism 10 years ago, so it wasn't really a thing then. But when you see at the bottom of the articles now, from my former colleagues saying this article is partly written by AI, I'd love to know, have they gone back and checked that's correct? And I don't know the answer to that, but that kind of terrifies me.
Yeah.
So my question was for yourself, Alan, and I was wondering how you found the narrative of some of the MRP polls that were kind of cropped up in the latest election and kind of engaging with those more kind of undecided voters. I think one of your slides touched on it a little bit. So did you have any kind of reflections on them, given some of the more traditional models that the Labour Party might use?
So MRP's kind of been grown quite a lot, sort of probably since the Brexit era, I suppose. Two things. One, it can be incredibly useful, and it was certainly used in England to see which seats were in play, and helped political parties of all colours on where they should be targeting resources. It didn't work particularly well in Scotland, the MRP in this election, and I think that's probably. I just don't think the pollsters conducting it had enough data or quite understood the Scottish political dynamics. It was coming up with weird results. Like I remember one of them showed that Labour was going to win one of the Ayrshire seats, but not win the Midlothian. And I mean, that's just not going to happen. If Labour's going to win Ayrshire and gets far ahead of that, Midlothian's in the bag. So it just didn't quite. I don't think it could quite figure out how the SNP fitted in the polling, because it was very much based on Conservative versus Labour. So it wasn't particularly useful in the Scottish context. I don't think any pollster paid for a specific MRP Scottish poll. Obviously, it's incredibly expensive. So. In the Scottish context, not that helpful, but broader UK-wide, yes. But the other point I would make is I don't know if this is an upside or a downside, but what MRP polls do, of course, is actually can create the media narrative. So, suddenly all these stories have been generated about that Labour's going to get this massive majority, and that can obviously influence voters in different ways. It could, you can get people voting, well, there's no point voting because Labour's going to win, or you can get people saying, I want to be part of something, and that is a thing as well. So it can have lots of different impacts.
Very much. I've got 2 questions here, so I'll go to yourself first.
Hi. My question is about bias and misinformation. So whoever feels like answering, go for it. But especially in the media and politics today, there's, that is kind of rife. People can walk into a room and say anything, unfounded, and people believe it. But there's something a bit more fundamental than that, which is that we humans just don't generally have that much statistical intuition, right? It's something that Daniel Kahneman wrote about. We're just not very good at determining something determining whether something is statistically significant or as much as we, so setting that articulation aside, my question is that when you have all of this AI-generated information around the internet, these echo chambers, as you spoke about, Steph, how does that potentially help or hinder, this whole issue around bias that comes from the data that we gather our information from? Because from what I've heard, I'm feeling a lot like it's hindering that journey towards people being a bit more statistically literate, if you know what I mean.
I'll go first, but absolutely, I do think it's hindering. I think with AI and all these very, very personalized algorithms that can completely show you what it thinks you want to see, it extends those echo chambers as well. You can be in an echo chamber, like a lot of us are in our own little echo chambers, but you're not so deep down that you can't surface for air and go, oh, actually, there's another perspective there. But this is where, when I was talking about integrity and trust, I think that legacy media, like traditional media, has a responsibility in this as well. There's been this bizarre shift in the last 10, 15 years where, this whole equal representation of both sides, of both opinions, has been taken too far, because, you've seen that meme, right? Like these 2 people standing in front of a number, it's a 9, it's a 6. And you're like, okay, they both have different opinions, but one of them is right because that number is meant to be one thing. So it's giving equal coverage to something that's not necessarily right. It's like, yes, of course but it has to be balanced. It can't just be someone who thinks the earth is flat is given the same amount of time in the platform as someone who, who knows the earth is round because it's most certainly spherical, kind of thing. So I think the media has a responsibility to play, outlets like FT, like BBC, like the Guardian and stuff. Yeah, it depends how you get. Yeah, I mean, obviously there are certain ones that do have biases the other way, but then this is just going on lots of different directions here. But this is where critical thinking comes in. You might not need to have statistical, expertise, but to not just mindlessly consume what you read as right is something we really need to embed in everybody.
That's my question.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of conversation right now about, AI. People don't even need to do these skills and learn these skills anymore because Copilot will do that for you or ChatGPT will do that for you, kind of thing. But we cannot, create a generation of people that blindly believe what a computer tells them is correct. Like you were saying over there, hallucinations and stuff. You end up spending more time checking that. Everyone's heard of the case of the lawyer who got ChatGPT to come up with past cases, came up with a list, half of it was completely made up, got into serious trouble with the judge, kind of thing. And so you have to also balance, if the time it takes you to fact check what this is doing for you, does that negate the efficiency gain that you're looking for? Then is there any point, kind of thing, so.
But this is where I think, you're talking about the hype, and I completely agree that the hype has been problematic. But I think there's a good side to that, because I think actually it is, and kind of to your point, this stuff has been around, that's why I titled my presentation, our generative AI story so far, because we've been doing AI for like over 10 years at the FT. I mean, come on, this is like not, this is an old technology actually. But I think that now, so this stuff has been kind of running our lives and our opinions and, for like a lot longer than we think. And actually, but now I think we have an opportunity to know it and to ask these tough questions and hold people to account and actually talk about AI fluency and literacy and quality of information and actually have these discussions in a way that is meaningful, whereas I don't think we would have had the opportunity before all of this. So I'm hopeful about that.
Yeah, because it's not new at all.
No.
We all heard about Cambridge Analytica, and like political manipulation through social media, and that's all down to data, And so this is nothing new, but it's just been exaggerated and kind of probably empowered by new AI technologies.
Super long time. I know I've got 2 more questions, so bear with me.
Hi, this question's for McGinley. I'm particularly interested about when you were discussing the various business processes that had been automated by the FT. You mentioned one went wrong, which I think was the IT help desk. So what actually went wrong, and what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, exactly. Have you tried turning it on and off again? Just went out to every employee. Oh man. So okay, saying that it went wrong is maybe basically it.
Oh, you said it didn't work.
Yeah, it didn't work. Basically, for the price that we were paying for the tool, and we just couldn't justify it. It just basically, it didn't remove as much of the workload. We found that basically still so much of the work had to be done by a human, and in which case, spending this big fee just didn't solve the problem that we had. Maybe for a different organization, if they had different processes or different technologies, it would have been fine. And I think some of it had to do with our scale, potentially. We were sort of in this weird halfway house where we were big enough that this was a problem, but not big enough that we could really leverage some of the capabilities offered by this third party. So again, we didn't have it didn't go wrong in the sense that we had robots eating the workforce or but it just you wouldn't tell it. Yeah, I wouldn't tell you, no. But it was just more. It was really a really boring ROI question. It didn't do what we needed to for the price.
Right, I've got one more question here, and then I'll thank you guys for your time.
Probably more for Alan than anything. Do you feel like in politics messaging there is a bit of a back to basics wave after the extreme personalization, the data-driven messaging, the narrowing down to the single voter, and I'm going to show you the thing that you really want to do, or you really want my party to be able to offer you. There is probably in the general election, I believe I read in the FT, because I have a subscription. But I think it was noted that in this general election campaign, there was a bit of a scale back on the extreme personalization and more on wider messaging, broader problems. And how does that reconcile with the ability to actually go to the very personalized messaging that the technology today offers?
Not just the most recent election. If you think back to the 2019 general election and Boris Johnson's "Get Brexit Done" message, that became dominated the entire campaign, and nothing else really got heard. And I think there probably is a risk that wider, important debate can get lost in politics. Now, I'm not saying this because McKinley's here, but the FT does a fantastic job of getting under the bonnet of some of these issues, and there are other outlets too. But yeah, too often, it just becomes around personalities and then just repeating the same messages again and again and again. And I think with all the challenges facing society and the public sector, I think we're probably doing a bit of a disservice, frankly, that we don't have a wider debate. But I don't have the solution to that, unfortunately.
an online question, if you can squish it in super fast. Do you have it? Oh, I see, you need the mic. Apologies.
Well, no, I guess you can technically read it online. But do you see LLMs being trained on Scottish law to make the legislation more consumable for the population?
Thank you. I guess that's to anyone. Maybe Steph, perhaps?
Well, I think, when people talk about LLMs, they do think ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, all that kind of thing. But there are lots of organizations that are using LLMs or even small language models very effectively, where it's trained on their corpus of data. I think Bloomberg has done that, haven't they? And they've actually trained on decades and decades of financial data, which they have now monetized. Because it's like brilliant. You can now easily access all this data. I can't say whether Scotland will do this with all the many tomes of Scots law, but that's definitely one avenue, of whether you can create, not personalized, but like internal language models to access, your very vast, backlog of back catalog of data, and that's something organizations that do have quality data can absolutely take advantage of. Because, as everyone's heard the stories of, when ChatGPT became the big thing, lots of giant organizations had to tell their staff, don't put client data in it, please, and things like that, because once again, this goes back to the AI literacy, education and stuff. People didn't know what it is. They just like, this is cool. It does this thing for me. I don't know where it's going. I don't care. But now it's like, let's get people to care. So.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but thank you so much to everyone that asked questions, and can I say a huge round of applause and thanks to our panel. Can you manage to jump? That's it, perfect. Thank you very much to everybody who came along. Really appreciate it. I realised at the beginning I omitted to say who I am, so apologies for that. I'm Ali Errington-Orr, and I'm the Director of Marketing Comms at the Data Lab, and we really appreciate you all coming along tonight. Thank you ever so much.